practitioner, making advances toward him, but trying to hold back. The teacher, who hadn't expected me to return, after we'd said goodbye, became uncomfortable. He took my note in person, saying, "Good, brother. I'm leaving it here to remember her by." Without him saying anything to me, I felt he had decided I was no longer his disciple. And I left the place. About 2 months later, I sent him the book, just released from the press, The Christ Line. Years later, I sent him others, such as The Living Path. And when I asked his secretary to make an appointment, it turned out that the master no longer had time. I understood that he didn't have time to treat a person who had gone crazy, delusional, that he had achieved la iluminación. Americo Living Trail 259. Since only Master Estrada and de la Ferrier can enjoy this privilege of being officially recognized as Illuminati, as well as a few others who may not be members of the GFU institution, and who, of course, are seen as inferior to Estrada and de la Ferrier, recognized as Christs of the Age of Aquarius by the Supreme Order of Aquarius. But, in any case, during that time, I sent Maestro Marcelli a letter, in case we had missed anything during our interview. I share the letter below, and to which, as expected, I received no response. Beloved Master Jose Marcelli. Thursday, April 3, 1997. The more I know the world, the more I love you, but my love has matured, because I recognize that I love you not for your personality, but primarily as a humanized teaching in a flesh and blood being named Guru Jose Marcelli. I convince myself that I would still love you as a friend, if I needed you to share your human affairs with me, with all the defects you might have in that case. I love him from the inside out, being aware of what he is, in a line of wisdom. I'm truly communicating with you, because I know I must, and even if it may not seem so, everything I tell you is not with the intention of boasting or hoping for special dispensation from you, hoping to acquire value in your eyes. I'm not writing to you, because I'm desperate and urgently need to get what's inside out. To the very few people I've shared the part of this transcendent process I've been through, it hasn't been out of a need to vent or to be loved. I've done so, simply because I believe what I'm saying is useful to them, and also because they'll allow me to serve others in a work of fraternity. Master, after the separation from my sister, the companion who gave me children, I stayed with the children. During the retreat I did, they were actually in the care of my biological mother and father. Now I live with them, and I do so happily, but I cannot stop being who I am. I cannot stop thinking, nor can I literally accept the precepts of the path. Although in essence, I do not intend to change or reject them, whether I understand them or not. I thought it would be helpful for you to first know my decisions and my process, because in many ways, all the progress I've made is the result of the care you and yours, who is my partner and the children's mother, have shown me. She has gone her way and I have decided to return to my Jegnian school, which I was reluctant to do when I first returned from a 40-month retreat where I experienced enlightenment. Those who have experienced enlightenment know what it means for the head channel to open in the concrete. Just like the space between the eyebrows. He knows the risks involved, and the dangers of madness that this entails, if the disciple is not prepared, is not sufficiently purified, or is not worthy. The desire to boast, or to be recognized as a person has died along with this process, just as the tyranny that the biological sexual has always meant for the initiate has also come to an end. I have been freed, and sometimes I have spiritual visions. Americo Living Trail 260. You know better than anyone that what an initiate experiences in his retreat is sacred. And so it all happened to me, not because it was my will, but because it is the will of my Heavenly Father. I don't feel special, and I'm convinced that enlightenment is not the final step, but rather the greatest dream a yogi can have. I have also learned that enlightenment is not an indispensable requirement for walking the path of royal initiation with dignity, but it is essential to live as enlightened, even if one is not enlightened. This is what the sacred initiatic tradition teaches. But the truth is that with enlightenment, life becomes clearer, passions are under perfect control, and spiritual peace never abandons us again. But I'm under no illusions. I knew intuitively that enlightenment is accelerated only through intelligently shared love with a woman, and one day, sexual energy is sublimated until the Sahasrara opens. But I say that I'm under no illusions, because I recognize firsthand the responsibilities that my new status entails. Indeed, the former master of the woman who was my retreat partner, her name is B, had also achieved enlightenment, but he became entangled in his sexual abuse, and entered into pacts with strange forces. He has several sexual partners and consciously controls his ejaculation, but he is unaware of the slavery he lives in. I sincerely believe that this is what Christ was referring to when he said, "Whoever sins against the Holy Spirit would be better off never having been born." Dear Master, thank God I have managed to find such rare strength and I have emerged victorious. UFOs exist. Good and bad. Blessed be divine providence and faith in the sublime Master and the sublime elder brother who never abandoned me. Because in the end, like in a drama, she, my retreat partner, revealed her true colors, and handed me over to undesirable forces. Then I understood what was hidden in her horoscope: bad relationships between Saturn and Venus, as well as Neptune in the 12th house. I hadn't wanted to accept it, because of the love I gave her, or what I believed she was, my virgin and eternal girlfriend. Then, after leaving my retreat, I calmly reviewed the comparison between his horoscope and mine, and discovered that what had happened was feasible, irreconcilable aspects between our Venus, Neptune, Sun, and Moon. As a result of my process, those forces were upset with me. But it was also interesting that I had read a lot about Buddha's life at the time. Buddha left everything at the age of 30, and after 5 years of meditation and pranayama practice, he managed to open the Sahasrara on December 8, when he was 35. It happened to me at 36. It is said that when he, Buddha, had acquired this new state, Mara, the tempter, approached him and offered him his 3 daughters of evil and iniquity, to try to seduce and deceive him. That happened to me, as well as other things. B was in charge of a yoga center that was a house owned by one of our students, and there were already 20 people here whom I had impersonally trained through her since my retreat. Already in my first relationship, my partner, the children's mother, had received my support to move to San Juan Teotihuacan, a block from the Pyramid of the Moon. And in order to end such Americo Living Trail 261, a difficult relationship with her, I had to begin a distancing process that I would later discover was my retreat. The same thing happened to me with B. I had given up everything, and had no contact with the children for 40 months, because something was moving me to have some kind of spiritual concrete encounter, on the fly. I needed to find the truth, even at the cost of my own life. At the end of this retreat, just as I did with the first woman, I left everything to the second, even the house, the Ave Phoenix Center, that was already being paid for in installments. In any case, I was already beginning to experience multidimensional sexuality. I understood something more sublime regarding orgasm, but also very dangerous. I confess that more than once I have been deceived by strange forces, but never dominated. It is a fate that sometimes, if one lacks the necessary fortitude, this can be worse than physical death. And the sublime of a marital relationship can become hellish. Especially when the state of enlightenment is forced without truly deserving it, sensing it, or fully realizing it. I remember being struck hard by the boyfriend of my last retreat partner, losing consciousness and feeling luminous forces take hold of me, and fill me with love. It's very difficult to explain, because when I woke up, I was happy, with a happiness that bordered on ecstasy. That's why I left B with so much love, and without any demands. I always felt happy from beginning to end, and I still retained that feeling. I understood issues of energy going to the heart, the space between the eyebrows and those things. Master, my life is a mystery, as is that of every initiate. I lived with my first partner for 7 years, not a day longer. When Dr. Estrada passed away, I wrote, moved by a higher power, something that said, ask Reverend Carlota for everything he has regarding GFU's affiliated and internal affairs. On the day of the burial, when we took Master Estrada to the cemetery, called the Garden of Memories, before leaving for the cemetery, the Reverend Gagpa gathered at the wake with Master Estrada's coffin in the center. I arrived here almost without realizing it, and being the only Yaman who stood among them all, I saw myself taking their oath, raising my right hand, and pledging to defend the Order of Aquarius. Shortly after, I had a vision, a very specific dream about the sublime elder brother, who had already passed away. It was real, and he said to me, "You go on, son, don't fear for your partner, the mother of the children, or for the children, you go on." I saw him clearly, as if I were with him physically. I knew he meant that I was next in line to the masters within the SOA, Supreme Order of Aquarius. Then, as this vision faded, it was confirmed, "Don't forget, son, always dress in civilian clothes." I understood that this detail was to give dignity to the GFU when giving lectures. When I woke up I told the children's mother, but she got upset. Now I wish to return to my school in Jagnian, but at the same time, I feel full, in an inner sense. Americo Living Trail 262. That was what made me tell you, the last time you deigned to receive me on Avenue Eugenia to chat with me, May 1997, that I did not intend to return to the GFU school, and that I was not prepared to be a guru who did not touch money. I recognize that I still have a lot to learn, but, on the other hand, the truth is already within me, and thus automatically manifests itself, in love for my GFU brothers and sisters, whom I now appreciate more than anything. I see you at the other extreme, you, Sat Arhat, and I, Jagnian, and I realize there's an initiatic law that makes things this way. Something like the mystery of the relationship between De La Ferrier and Estrada. They were so different, yet so united. Master, it would do me a world of good, if you would send me some acknowledgement of receipt of this letter. I want you to know, that you can count on me, if I can be of any help to you, and that I consciously accept you as a master with authority over me in everything I have to learn from the SOA and GFU. And that surely that's no problem for who I am. Forgive my ignorance, and accept my brotherly love. I'm willing to fulfill my mission, small or big, it doesn't matter anymore. Sincerely, R. Corrected and adapted for publication by the same author, taken from my work, Memoirs and Initiatory Disquisitions. Pages 197 to 201. It was in this way, that the door, that gave me access to Maestro Marcelli closed. But as the masters told me during my retreat, when one door closes, another, even larger one, opens. And so it happened in a most marvelous way. Sexuality in the life of the enlightened. Sexual passion remained within me, not dying but tending to come under my control. The difference is, that what he had previously called love he now recognized, was never like that. The feeling that remains, is as if I had never felt real love before, and above all, in my human experience, and from studies I know, that it is not possible to control our sexual libido, unless we repress or block it. While it's true, that a life without passion, is not worth living, it's even more true, that a life without love, and conscience is a useless passion. Only by developing the will to love, and by continually realizing being like enlightened people, even if we are not enlightened, does it allow us to, in a certain way, control our sexuality. Americo Living Trail 263. I always found it suspicious those instructors who taught courses on what they called the Tower of Love, in which they taught a method for controlling ejaculation. In reality, what the great masters must have meant was that, in this method, the intention is to avoid ejaculating by raising the energy. But what it's really about is love. Because sex without love, is the very cause of failure in every relationship. A real surrender is what gives us the right to enjoy sex without measure, because this sex cannot fail to be immaculate, and at the same time, unlimited. It is a sexuality that is not limited to coitus, but to the yoga of a couple, physical, emotional, mental and spiritual. It was thanks to this way of thinking about sexuality, that I was able to understand love without condemning the sexuality of others. And that's why, at one of the places where I taught, a secretary approached me. She didn't look very pleasant, but she wanted to talk to me privately, and asked me to draw up her horoscope. She then confessed to me, that she had 3 lovers at the same time, without any of them knowing about the other 2. I hadn't realized it, but as I got to know her, I discovered that this person had great respect for me as a master. For some reason, she felt that I was truly a master. This would have been of no use, if I had merely sought to satisfy a self-centered ego, but that wasn't the point. Rather, she trusted me, and therefore, I could help her. Just like, for example, the professional doctor can do, when his patient has faith in him. then the doctor can work miracles with that person. In the same way, what helped was that she had faith in the master, and that was saving no one but her from the whole mess she was experiencing. Because what I advised her was valuable. This allowed me to give her my love selflessly, and she listened. I was able to guide her, and I know that with this faith, even though I stopped seeing her, she will move forward, freed from her vice of lust. After the final breakup with my partner, I stopped having sex, and yet I felt fine, because before, even though I had done it, there was still some form of sexual repression. It was going to take a year of the celibacy, and then enter another mode of sexuality, that is difficult to describe. Control of sexuality was so possible for me that, for example, I could watch erotic films, literature, nudes, etc. without being worried or despised. Pilot group and love. Although I already had my pilot group, I still frequented small groups that formed in the places where I gave talks or astrology courses. Americo Living Trail 264. Naturally, the directors of the schools where I gave my talks were uncomfortable, especially because a few people would later join me in the pilot group I was forming. And the school directors thought I was stealing their people. But I was very clear that everyone is free, and that consciousness cannot be negotiated like any lucrative product. If an institution isn't prepared to manage conscience, and, above all, cultivate it, then we all have the right to continue law and sentence as we see fit. This is something that is still under discussion regarding educational institutions in general. My future wife. The pilot group would occasionally continue to participate in my talks at various events. Around July 1996, in Villa de las Flores, I went to promote an introductory course in astrology that I wanted to start with the students taking naturism classes there. There were about 40 people, and most were enthusiastic. I agreed to start as early as possible, and they thought it would be best in the morning, around 10 a.m. On the scheduled day, there were only about 5 students. One woman, who was somewhere between youthful and mature, caught my eye. She was wearing a white blouse and blue jeans. Her small stature suited her regular, feminine body. When we realized no one else would be coming, I decided to start my course with these few people. And this woman was very interested in learning astrology. So this was very valuable to me. The relationship with her was only related to law and Sananza. Her admiring me as a master and me admiring her as a disciple. His maturity in dealing with astrology and his genuine desire to learn caught my attention, so much so that a true mental relationship developed between us. I learned that he had 2 children and his partner. As I attended classes, I began to harbor hope that she would become a true disciple. A few months later she was at the birth of the pilot group. More than a year passed, and it was around August 1997, when I had just finished publishing the book Lini Christica. My student Angel, and I had received the first edition of 1,000 volumes. I was at home, when I received a phone call, and it was her. She'd never called me before. Americo Living Trail 265. In general, I had been careful not to involve my personal life in my role as an astrology professor. No one knew I had children, but since my more advanced students inspired a certain peace and confidence in me, I had given them my phone number in case of emergency. So when she called my house, I was glad to hear her. And if she was talking to me, it must be about something important. She told me that a few days ago she had visited Plaza Galerías and there she met a special person who gave her pyramid therapy, using magical artifacts and special stones, which boosted her overall energy. After this, she could only sleep 2 hours a night. This person invited her for the following day or weekend, to an esoteric talk that was going to be given at an important hotel, and she attended. He found her there, and told her about the people who were there and those who, even if they weren't, were accustomed to attending these kinds of events. They were figures of bourgeois mysticism or esotericism. In other words, New Age people, but they liked luxury. Not just money, but comfort. And as time passed, he then began to confess his love for her, which came from the past, from other lives, and that, in this moment of their wonderful reunion, he was willing to become her slave, and give her a lot of money, if she agreed to love him. Then he kissed her. He told me all this trying to get me to explain what was happening. "What's going on?" "It's very simple," I answered. "He wants to sleep with you." She began to hesitate, unable to believe what I was telling her. For a moment, she tried to justify the situation, and think I was exaggerating, or that she hadn't fully understood what she'd said. So she argued, "Why would you want to sleep with me? These things always start like this, and end up like this," I insisted. Since she didn't seem to understand, I told her not to worry, she could just decide whether or not she wanted to sleep with him. In reality, I was already familiar with this process, which, with some variations, occurred with all my students as they began to truly understand themselves. Because as they try to find the light, things happen in their lives that cause them to evolve or give up on this search. But like the rest of my students, I couldn't explain to her that it was a test. She was a doctor, and worked in a public institution serving the people. Her partner worked in the same sector, but he was married, and although he had given her two beautiful Americo Living Trail 266 children, he had shown that he would never leave his wife to pursue a serious relationship with her. However, as my student progressed in her astrology studies, she began to realize the need for a real change in her life. But even though she needed to do something to give her existence more meaning, I never imagined her test would have to be of this magnitude. That is, with a man who wielded magic, and possessed a certain spellbinding power. He sensed that this woman, my student, was missing something to be happy in life, and he was willing to suck her in. But why a test of this stature with such a sophisticated and cunning magician? There was nothing between her and me, but a relationship of instructor and student. While I was thinking about this, she told me on the phone that she needed to speak with me in person, so I could clarify the fact that the guy wanted to sleep with her. She also wanted to explain in detail what happened to her during her visit to Plaza Galerías. I gladly accepted, because this student interested me as a disciple, and I informed her that the following morning I would visit the center of Oro, and that we would meet at the gazebo at Los Sibils, the woman who tames wild beasts, and makes them serve to pull her carriage. The next morning I walked past the doors of the Oro Naturist Center. At the entrance, there were some young women who caught my attention, but they were missing something: maturity. I continued walking for about 20 meters, and came to the gazebo where Los Sibils, Aquimi student, dressed in white, was standing. I asked her why she wore white, and she told me she felt she should do it that way. We chatted for a while, and finally, I warned her that she was undergoing a test, which meant she was in danger of being left out of the pilot group I was forming. That's how things are. She should stay away from that person, and not be mistaken in trying to put him in competition with me as a master. I deliberately carried the Christ line book I had just received from the printer, and gave it to her, the first Christ line book for her. Something that seemed quite symbolic to me, or rather, obvious. It was a sign that things belong to whom they should belong. Meanwhile, my disciple was struggling with conflicting feelings within her. But for my part, I was confident that in the comparison with that second master, I would emerge victorious. Around that time, she had had the dream in which I symbolically appeared as a guard dog. Another black dog was furiously trying to attack the brothers who made up the pilot group, but it didn't dare, because I was on guard. When we said goodbye, without thinking I approached him, and gave him a subtle kiss. Master Americo Living Trail 267. I gave her a small bottle of authentic Egyptian perfume for protection. And she told me that her suitor had actually given her some perfume. When she gave it to me to smell, I thought it smelled of sex and luxury. The days passed, and since she couldn't sleep as many hours as she used to, due to the therapy this person gave her, she began to study the Christ line book completely. He began to discover that I was not only a master of astrology, but that I also knew other very special things. A month passed, and September 1997 was approaching. Then she asked me what it was like when one morning she woke up, and the whole room was filled with colored light, just like her body. I realized that the hosts Lalas were preparing her for a special meeting with me, but I didn't know what it was about, because between her and me there was no other interest than La Enseñanza. Furthermore, I didn't see her as outstanding in her feminine form, as she acted just like any other student. I even saw her as distant from the master's true needs as everyone else. For example, when vacations and holidays came around, everyone forgot about my existence, and, naturally, my personal problems, especially my financial ones. No one was ready to take care of the master. They didn't even suspect such a thing existed. However, one time she showed up to my class without bringing her car, and when the session ended for some reason, we walked together to catch our respective rides. Then, many very strange little lights, UFOs, appeared in the sky, which I was already used to, but this time there were more than 20 of them hovering here and there. This worried me a lot because, in addition, I felt very happy, just by the fact of walking with this woman and sure, that it was not a mirage of a simple teenager. But since I already knew what heartbreak is, I didn't give it much importance. ASRHAMDE Hidalgo and Mystical Weddings. It was about halfway through 1997, and the same sister who had lent us her home for the pilot group sessions offered us her husband's humble country cabin, a piece of land located in the state of Hidalgo. We were all excited and decided to spend a weekend there. I had an idea that perhaps one day this place would become ashram, a place where a master lives with his disciples. It was a tight group of about 15 or 20 people, including her children. Everything on this trip was about work between the master and his disciples. Americo Living Trail 268. What was interesting that day was that electric light had recently passed near this mountainous site. And my students, who were already adults and owners of this place, installed INGLÉS electricity here for the first time. I was attending to my students, and in the afternoon I had a very clear and specific vision. At first, I wanted to resist letting it develop in my mind, because I knew there was a lot of deception involved in this kind of thing. But then I realized it was harmless, and I had nothing to lose. So, I let it happen. It was extremely interesting and instructive. According to this view, this place in Hidalgo was becoming an ashram, and many people began to search for the guru, who was myself. I sensed what was going through their minds, and in general, they were people who wanted to take advantage of the situation. One of these students was very immature, and had initially claimed to love the teacher, but later, as soon as another figure appeared, he became more famous in the eyes of the majority. That childish student switched places with me, and that brought problems to the work in this place in Hidalgo. However, my future wife took me by the hand and I realized, in this vision, that she would never turn her back on me. What the masters were trying to tell me is, that this woman was my true disciple. A few months later, on September 13, 1997, the pilot group returned to ashram in Hidalgo. She had recently formally ended her relationship with her partner. I had already told him from the first visit that I had had the vision. And this time I added, "These are our mystical weddings, which are sealed with this vision I have had." She was surprised, but it was evident that the affinity between them was very strong and defined. How could I not have perceived it before? The attraction between us was first a mental crush, then an emotional one through the group, and then a physical one. She had already decided to separate from her partner, a relationship that was not going well. That night we defined our love as a couple without having sex. I began to be so surprised by his maturity and silent presence. As we walked through the forest, I told her about my experiences on the trail, and that I had been on a 40-month retreat that concluded with my enlightenment. She listened without interfering too much. I think I mentioned I had children. And when I spoke about nature and the encounter with the spiritual path, she suddenly stopped on the small path we were walking. She looked at the enormous trees, the green grass, and, focusing her attention mainly on the flowers, she said to me, "Americo Living Trail 269. The important thing about unity is to experience it in a personal way, to merge with nature itself." Her response surprised me, because of how apt it was. And because I couldn't have said it better myself. It revealed how close she felt to nature. It was the second time, when we were returning from ashram, that he invited me to stop by his house first, before going to my house. He was nearing completion of some rooms in the back of his house, and he wanted it to become a place to hold new age groups. I entered the living room of his house and the first thing I saw was a stained glass window with Egyptian motifs. As evening fell, one of her relatives arrived for a surprise visit. As I was about to say goodbye, I realized she was still tied to her very human family life. And with everything I had recently experienced, starting with my failed relationship with the mother of my children, sealed in my blood like fire. My sensitivity was stimulated, combined with the extreme freedom that the retreat experience brings. And then, I decided I didn't want to upset her. My freedom had come at a high cost to me, and I wasn't going to give it up just like that, for anything. I stood up, and said goodbye to my future sister-in-law and her partner. But at that moment, despite the fact that they could see what was going on between us, she apologized and followed me out. I reached the corner, and was waiting for the minibus to board. Meanwhile, I told her she had to get on with her life and I with mine. Then she told me, with her heart in her hand, that she couldn't live without me. My response was, that I already knew that. I boarded the minibus, and was satisfied with her genuine willingness. From then on she would show me all the maturity of a very old soul. I arrived home that night, but everyone had gone to the wake of my grandmother Gloria, my father's mother. This seemed to me to indicate that, through my insignificant person, a new race was being born into the world. Such was my internal state, so difficult to understand from the outside, especially if we try to use our mind superficially. That night I stayed alone in my house in Netzahualcoyotl, and woke up on September 15th, but I couldn't stop thinking about my future wife. I was in love. I picked up the phone and called him. She felt the same. She was very nervous and excited. We were definitely meant for each other. Americo Living Trail 270. I told her on the phone that I was going to visit her, and she was happy. So I finished meditating, and immediately went to meet him. We met at the corner of his house, and then he invited me into his house, where his children were. It was a national holiday, celebrating La Independencia Mexican National Day. She prepared a simple but exquisite meal, and she her children, and I sat down, to eat as a family. The television was on at 11 p.m. The President of Mexico symbolically gave the cry of La Independencia. I told her I was planning to stay that night, and after a few buts, she agreed. It was an unforgettable night. Not a night of sex, nor of simply mundane romantic love. Rather, it was a seal of the energy of a cosmic moment that came together in this perfect way. As Maestro Marcelli once said, how many things must have happened before on the planet for this to be possible? How many governments have fallen and risen again? How many situations around the world every minute for her and I to be able to meet at this very moment, sealing our pact with the destiny of all of Mexico? Because, just as Miguel Hidalgo, the liberator of Mexico, took up the banner with the image of La Virgin Maria, to lead the Mexican people toward their liberation from slavery. Now with a small pilot group, I was taking her, under the influence of Virgo, to initiate an unprecedented spiritual movement in La Year Aquarius. It was not a woman and a man, but two energies finding their natural and precise course, on the exact day destined by a cosmic plan. As for my intimacy with her, it was, above all, an experience of filling my skin with sensations and the quality of an energy that no woman had ever given me. There are millions of lovers, but there is only one woman who can introduce us to a higher sexuality. My intimate relationship with my retreat partner was outstanding for its duration. And now, this woman was escaping from time and space, taking me with her. So, 10 minutes of this intimacy covered hours of energy. Americo Living Trail 271. It would take months for my sexuality to surpass all limits, and become not only physical, but also emotional and mental. A 24-hour sexuality. Continuous sex, just as I had suspected it existed, based on my research on the subject. She was definitely a cosmic woman whom he hadn't been able to recognize, because she was so disguised as a human. And precisely because she still had human flaws. Only with the vision that the masters presented to me, was I able to recognize it. From that day on, we were bound together. However, it didn't matter that I would lose her the next day, because my life had already found its destiny. That's why I told him that night. Now is when you become a virgin. I don't know exactly what she understood, but as for me, I knew precisely what I was referring to. The next day I went to my grandmother Gloria's funeral, and as they lowered the coffin to what would be her grave, several women began to sing "Glory to her, the mother of the Savior." I realized that my grandmother hadn't known it, but one of her grandsons had managed to change his own mental genealogy, and was becoming a being of light, because he had finally found the path of salvation. This was a very clear message for me. Being energies before being people, my relationship with my wife wasn't going to be simply with her appearance, but with the state of consciousness of the eternal feminine in the world. We should all be in a state of true consciousness, but that's not always the case. This higher sexuality escapes the third dimension and becomes multidimensional, such that all the defects that it might already find in women, and especially in the most beloved, are related to an old history of humanity, since we were created as a human race. I always suspected that something was not right with humanity as such, although of course, we are all children of the gods. I began to realize that no matter how evolved a human being, and especially a woman, may be, they are still human, and, therefore, share flaws, to a greater or lesser extent, inherent to the human race itself. Based on traumatic experiences dating back almost 2 million years. When we were raped by the gods, it says La Biblia, and the angels lived with the daughters of men. For this reason I remembered a communication with the masters in which my retreat companion ordered me. Americo Living Trail 272 say, nothing from your lower self, she meant her own lower self, has power over me, only what comes from your being. Also around April, my 1996 Nicholas met from Retiro, and I went to Chapultepec, and she was trying to figure out how to end our relationship. We walked around the museum a bit, looking at some Mexican history. And at one point, when she was trying to express her confused desire to end the relationship, I told her, I can't accept a partner inferior to the experiences I've had so far. On the contrary, she must be better, surpassing everything I've experienced. And that's really how it happened with the woman who would become my wife. To be honest, when a relationship isn't going well, it's not that it, at some point, throws us into darkness. What happens is, that each of us as individuals hasn't matured yet, and humanity as a whole is trapped in certain life experiences that it hasn't been able to overcome despite the passage of centuries. Maturity comes from something Master Estrada taught, when he spoke to us about the living path, and explained that Ha initiates always repeat, in essence, the same path as the great masters. And the last of them always takes a step further. I was following in the footsteps of great masters, so it was possible for me to discover in my new companion a part of the soul of biblical women. For example, when Zipporah fell in love with Moses, she found him, after he had been cast out into the desert. She was already older. Now I understood where that outburst came from with which I expressed myself, when I heard her speak in the gazebo Los Cibeles, and I said to her, I'd love to be with you. They were just words to the wind, but only until I managed to discover my relationship with my eternal feminine, directly linked to the destiny of women in general. I later told her this. Inside you are all possible women. It was no longer something that was in my hands as an individual, but rather we were part of a greater cosmic plan. And not everyone could understand it. There were signs of this. For example, the basis of our relationship from the beginning was never the desire to possess one another. On the contrary, his attitude, and mine, has always been one of surrender, as long as the other is happy. In any case, I already knew that no one can give up what belongs to them. God delicately and inexorably prepares us to transform from people into energy. And this allows us to understand the need for appropriate combinations. Perhaps this is why, when I told her about my life in the ashram of Hidalgo, she said, Americo Living Trail 273 You're a danger, I love you, and I have no guarantees of anything with you. Later he added, if you leave me now that would kill me. And it wasn't referring to a breakup of our personalities, but rather it was already an energy subject to a cosmic plan that moved us both. Hence the delicacy of our relationship, and little by little I had to go through various tests before I really understood it. How far are these institutions like the GFU from attracting cosmic women and men into their ranks? My old brothers, you want to subject everything to your initiatory and pre-initiatory schools, to your councils, collegiate bodies, and literally, to your entire bureaucracy, that tries to organize a new age order, as if it were simply a repetition of the old world religions. Completely forgetting the true great universal fraternity. I can't imagine cosmic women and real men agreeing to attend Yamine's school for more than a year, then several more years at other levels, all to try to prove that they are cosmic beings. This is getting ridiculous. A cosmic being will never waste their time attending yoga classes or becoming vegetarian, under a rule. They belong to the world and you have to be there to find them. They are brothers for whom official insignia and names are a means, not an end. Simple people who don't boast about their private lives or their esoteric knowledge, they simply use it as a matter of course, as their search and path unfolds. It was because of my way of being, that my pilot group was made up of people of this nature. When their mission and ability to follow me ended, no one was upset, nor do I think they felt expelled. They simply continued on their path, which seemed to me like an alternative path, but not the true living path. They, of course, don't think that way, or maybe they do, but they can't give any more. If this woman was going to want to live with me, even though I confessed to her that I had 4 children, she was the first in the group to find out, she'd have to accept it in an extremely short time. I'm talking about a week to 10 days. And, yet after all this time, she was ready to accept me with 4 children. Would any ordinary woman do this? I was convinced she wouldn't. Especially if I didn't offer her any Americo Living Trail 274 guarantees of anything mundane, not even financial. I also didn't promise her anything other than matters of the cosmos. Because of what I'd learned, I didn't touch any money. I mean, I did, but never to satisfy my dreams, but rather to cover my expenses and manage that money for the benefit of these children. She didn't know me well either, but she would soon. When she realized I had no interest in her house, my idea was to marry separate property. Things like this only happened between people who truly love each other. Marriage. Before moving forward, I made her birth chart, and compared it to mine in a process that in horoscopy is called synastry. Then I realized that the only serious obstacle was Neptune square Sunday. It referred to the presence of our children and the way in which each of us, she and I as individuals, believed they should be formed. But, on the other hand, there were bad aspects in our respective horoscopes, but nothing that harmfully interfered with each other's lives. Rather, the points of contact between us were always good aspects of our linked lives. Above all, there was one that only occurs in synastry between soulmates. It is her Mars in the 12th house and trine to my Venus in the 8th house. It means that she carries me, her Mars, inside her, and I carry her, my Venus. Those who know a little about astrology can get an idea about these data. When I first arrived at her house, I realized this wasn't a coincidence. Something was beginning to move in our lives. At the time, she was worried, because she wanted to put her focus on it, and I told her, "Time no longer matters to you, you've already arrived." That same day, before the surprise visit from her relatives arrived, I told her that we should get married legally, because I didn't want her family to continue seeing her as the simple lover of a man next, and I added, "I know that legal marriage is not in your interest, but it's the best I can offer you, so that society will respect you, and so will your family." Then I called him on the phone, because I had already calculated the best time for our marriage, and it had to be the following month, exactly on October 17, 1997, when the transiting sun touched his Neptune in Libra, House VI. We didn't plan for it to be a big party, especially since it wouldn't be healthy for her to bear the costs of a legal marriage. So when we next met with our pilot group, we told her we were getting married on October 17th and that, if they wanted to join us, they could each prepare a dish and come to the party. Everyone was happy. Americo Living Trail 275. But there was another delicate situation in my life. I had just returned from my retreat, and moved back in with my children a little over a year ago. They were still enrolled in the public school near my house in Netzahualcoyotl. On the other hand, taking those children away from their grandmother, my mother who had dedicated herself so much to caring for them, when I put them in her care, didn't seem fair. But now I had 2 homes. One was hers, where I loved to be, and the other was Netzahualcoyotl's, where my mother had recovered her son and grandchildren, easing some of the pain caused by the recent loss of her husband, my father. Grandma was like a mother to those children, and they already counted on waking up happily every Saturday or Sunday, to have their father teach them yoga classes, and then spend a good time eating together. Because of all this, the situation became delicate, and at first I wanted to balance it, by staying half the week at her house and the other half at my mother's house. We weren't married yet, and the situation was very fragile. But I had been strongly trained by my teachers during my retreat, and this ambivalence didn't last more than 2 weeks, until the end of November. Everything came together one night, when I was at Netzahualcoyotl's house and I called her to say hello. I realized she missed me as much as I missed her. So I said goodbye to my mother, and told her I was staying at her house. This hurt her, but I had made a decision. I was, apparently, leaving my children again to, as always, sort out my life first. The tide broke out again, but this time mainly with my naturally dissatisfied brothers. They didn't agree with me leaving my children again for a woman. One thing in my favor was that before he died, my father had wanted me to have my partner, because he wanted me happy. And this was what I used most to argue, why I had to get on with my life first. Besides, I wasn't abandoning my children, this time. They knew where I was. But the waves weren't going to calm down, on the contrary, they would turn into a storm, as soon as I told them that in 15 days the date was set for me to marry her, in a civil ceremony. In the eyes of my family, this man was definitely still crazy. In no time, we arrived at the civil wedding date, and our families, both hers and mine, made the best arrangements they could in record time. So they did us the honor of attending. My group, who truly saw me as their guru, arrived all smiles, because their master and his most advanced disciple were getting married. Americo Living Trail 276. We had rented some tables, and very modestly, all the food they had prepared, was set out there. Someone brought a delicious cake, and her mother brought various stews. The day was bright, and mid-afternoon the lawyer in charge of legalizing the marriage document arrived. He was a very special man, mature and humorous, an Aquarius type. He had a voice that inspired confidence, and that's how we were married. We danced until midnight, and then set off on our honeymoon to Zitucuaro, Michoacan, passing through Toluca. Honeymoon. We stayed at a hotel in Zitucuaro, and left early the next day for a popular beach resort. Since it wasn't open, we asked some kids if they knew of another nearby resort. They told us that further up into the mountains, along the small road in front of us, we would reach the Agua Blanca Beach Resort. It was an unpaved road, but the valley surrounding us was incredible, full of flowers, trees, and the smell of the countryside. We enjoyed it. After 20 minutes of slow, solitary walking along the mountainside, we found ourselves at the entrance to the resort. I looked up at the main sign at the entrance, and it read, Shangri-La. I was very surprised, because during my retreat I had seen a movie called Lost Horizon, and Shangri-La was a paradise in the mountains near Tibet. According to the movie, those who come to live here never die, or can spend more than 250 years, before they reach physical death. I explained all this to my companion, and she looked thoughtful. A moment later, she added, do you realize that we are in Agua Blanca and nearby is the so-called Ciudad Hidalgo? That's right, we're back in Agua Blanca and Hidalgo's place. It was too much of a coincidence that the ashram of Hidalgo we visited with our pilot group was in the town called Agua Blanca. And now we were experiencing exactly the same thing. What is the mystery of all this? We spent an unforgettable afternoon in the Agua Blanca hot springs in Zitucuaro. Wrapped around each other, we then reclined in our car seats before heading back to our hotel. We were so pleasantly tired that we fell asleep. It must have been almost an hour, and when she woke up she stood looking at the mountains of that place with great respect, and began to talk to me. Americo Living Trail 277. I dreamed that spiritual brothers were leading us. They were dressed in Egyptian-style robes, and were climbing the stone steps we've seen physically here, inside the spa, on the side of the hill. We were welcomed and dressed like them. We continued discussing, and wanted to conclude, that there was an ethereal city there, which for some reason we were allowed to enter. For my part, I didn't remember having dreamed, but what she told me didn't seem strange to me. The next day, we planned to visit the Monarch Butterfly Sanctuary. But since it wasn't yet time for the butterflies to arrive, we continued on, and before we knew it, we were crossing the very heart of Hidalgo, continuing up into the mountains, the peak of which is called Los Ezefers. I felt like Moses climbing Mount Sinai, because the sulfurs sounded like a reference to purifying fire in the highest heart of the mountains. Once again, we spent an unforgettable afternoon immersed in a pool of sulfurous water, while all around us was the silent forest and enormous mountains. The view was incredible. The next day we returned to Mexico City, passing through Toluca again, and then we approached our house. While this was happening, I was trying to ground myself in the new reality surrounding me, and I realized I didn't know what was going to happen to us. I only experienced myself as floating in the middle of a world where my entire real family, through the process of my living path, could only be reduced to her. Our daily lives were very different, as she had been accustomed to going to work and being bound by a schedule for almost 20 years. While I had only known total freedom, she was also very free in her own way. She had never allowed her family to take away her independence, yet she enjoyed domestic life, like any good mother devoted to her children. It was very different from me, who, although I also loved my children, was far from being a paternalistic father. Rather, I felt them as an extension of my love for the children of the world. I was already free of any emotional ties to my children. It was on the basis of these reasons that, foolishly, we sometimes began to argue. But our love was always stronger than everything. And this is possible when the awareness of who we each are grows constantly. Americo Living Trail 278. One memorable day, we were both lying in bed. I was holding her close, and she appeared in my mind's eye la Virgin Maria, smiling at me with great love. She was wearing a beautiful blue blanket. I immediately remembered what I usually say during my meditation. I am the miracle of La Virgin Maria. The vision lasted a few seconds and disappeared. Out of curiosity, I wanted to ask her if she knew that La Virgin Maria I was protecting her, and she told me that she did, that as a child she had had a very clear dream about her. I asked him how he saw her, and he explained that she was wearing a sky blue cloak, and that her face was very beautiful. Then I told her that I had seen her exactly like that. After our marriage, our pilot group underwent major adjustments. Some were very jealous, because I had chosen her as my wife, especially the women. In this way the group became more compact, while a few others were about to appear. For my part, I was familiar with this process, but I was worried that it wouldn't harm her. However, once I tried to comfort her, she replied with great aplomb. A little tremor like that doesn't scare me. At first I was pleased, but then I started to think very seriously. Gosh, if this woman wasn't scared of tremors, maybe I would be. But I realized that beneath the strength that had allowed her to buy her own house and raise her own children, despite having to go to work, lay a very delicate woman in need of a lot of love and understanding. The energy of the Pyramid of the Sun. After my retreat, I had felt a strong urge to return to Teotihuacan, and a few months after we were married, we went with our small group to La Pirámide Teotihuacan del Sol. From there, we planned to go to the mystical ashram, also located in this area. It was a place my wife liked to visit from time to time before joining me. It was the first time since my retreat ended that I climbed the Pyramid of the Sun. About 20 people went with us, including my mother and our children. Americo Living Trail 279. As we climb the Pyramid of the Sun, I take my wife's arm. Our children and the small group accompanying us climb on their own. Once at the top, the group and my wife head toward the center of the pyramid to meditate, but there are too many tourists making a racket. Then I began to have a strong telepathic communication with invisible beings, so I moved away from the group and sat down to meditate. They told me the purpose of the pyramids is for a high initiate who has reached la iluminación. El initiation when he is already enlightened to climb them. He is accompanied by us as he ascends the Pyramid of the Sun, so that at the top he may be consecrated. Then, the door where evil dwells is sealed. That is why the pyramids were built, so that the enlightened one may be consecrated. I realized then, that the heart and the pineal gland are governed, at least in astrology, by the vibratory affinity with the sun. We descended from the pyramid and I continued to be amazed by this unexpected event that had happened to me, and above all, because I felt so good climbing the Pyramid of the Sun with my wife. Evening fell, some brothers had to return home early and the few of us who remained headed towards the mystical ashram. More than a month ago, at the invitation of my wife, I visited this ashram for the first time, and when I looked at the photograph of its spiritual guide, which was in the dining room, I immediately knew that all these sympathizers belonged to a group of followers of a true enlightened one, who by then had already passed away. That day we walked barefoot through the garden, and in the afternoon, as we left the ashram, a huge image of a beautiful woman appeared in my mind. She simply said, "Thank you." Then the image disappeared. She is the most advanced disciple of this great master called Irumei. This time, after descending the Pyramid of the Sun, we arrived at the same place. We meditated with about 80 people, and at the end, as is customary, we were given free food. It was just getting dark when we left. It was time to drop the kids off at their house, before continuing on our way to my wife's house. The experience, and especially the energy, after visiting the Pyramid of the Sun in Teotihuacan, was very powerful. When this happens, and we're in tune, it's great. But if not, then unfortunate but necessary crises occur. My own mother was already harboring some mixed feelings, that she had been resenting, and that same night, when we left her at Netzahualcoyotl's house with the children, she exploded. Americo Living Trail 280. But my wife was very patient, and without me saying anything, on her own initiative she said to my mother, "If you can't handle the children anymore, I'll take care of them. Let them come live with us." It was a dignified attitude that really surprised me, since we had never spoken about the subject directly before. During these days, I tried to comfort my mother, but it was impossible. She had become confused. So, one of these times, I was returning from visiting her, and feeling a little sad. It was a day when my wife accompanied me. She drove the car, while I sat in the seat next to her. At that moment, I began to hear a beautiful female voice inside me, saying, "I'm Mother Earth, and I am here to give you my love and comfort. My hero, my child, your true mother loves you." The year after our marriage, when the registration period for public schools arrived, the children would come to live with us, and thus we unified a single family, her 2 children and my 4, all almost of a similar age, making 8 members of a new family ready to face a shared destiny. Strengthening the pilot group. It took months of trying to temper a real group, which I had no idea where to put. I always waited for the divine sign, and also for whatever would make me happy. Aware that if something made me happy and lasted permanently, it was because it was real. Every Saturday, I would gather these people at our good student's apartment. Little by little, I began to abandon my activities with students from various places, to focus on awakening the members of my pilot group, so they could have the opportunity to start a real spiritual movement. They all endured a lot, and each one had an interesting story. For example, one of these brothers was losing his grocery store, another was having a conflict with 2 women who were sisters-in-law, and they were either fighting or sharing. Meanwhile, the poor man couldn't choose between the 2. He had promised to publish some of my books, but his sexual conflicts with these women won him over. Still others greatly admired, and always respected me. They were enthusiastic young men, and had several appointments with me. As for Aurora's group, it quickly disappeared. The sister from Villa de los Flores, who had initially welcomed me so warmly, began to feel uncomfortable, because I was too independent, and no longer willing to return to the Jagnian pre-initiatory school. She felt I had stolen from people, and also that I had gotten married, and somehow everything was going well for me. Americo Living Trail 281. We liked each other, but she had the ideal of a teacher who was completely naturalist. An ovo-lacto-vegetarian person was not enough, in her way of seeing a teacher. I was a fanatic about Maestro Estrada, like many of my brothers from La GFU, and I felt rejection towards the Master of La Ferrier, so I listened to the versions of French brothers from La GFU who had investigated in France about the whereabouts of Dr. de La Ferrier and said that it was official news, that the Master of La Ferrier had died of alcoholism, and that he was also diabetic. Another piece of information that generally upset the brothers of La GFU was that the Master La Ferrier had met a dancer in Europe and apparently had had an affair with her. All of this makes it seem as though the Master was simply a profane human being who failed to follow Master Estrada. This is curious and illogical, since the Master La Ferrier was the Master of Masters, of Master Estrada, and not the other way around. But when one becomes a fanatic, one generally reverses one's values. I never held a grudge against the sister from Villa de los Flores, because she truly reached out to me, and, at heart, she's a truly fraternal person. But her disregard for the GFU guidelines sometimes upsets many good-hearted people. I drew the sister's birth chart, and she truly thanked me. Never ended badly with any of them, not on my part. Anyway, that afternoon when I sensed the discontent of the sister from Villa de los Flores, and was hurt by her speaking so badly of the Master of La Ferrier, I was walking along the ring road near Satellite and Arboladist aboard my bus to Cuautitlán Izcalli, and I felt like